I'm Otto Laske, and I want you to learn a little bit more about what is the Constructive Developmental Framework, CDF. What is CDF? The essence of CDF is really quite simple. The idea is that people don't just speak or behave, but that there is a frame of reference or a mindset that underlies what they say and do. And this mindset is a developmental mindset in the sense that it develops over the lifetime. So in social emotional terms, you go through stages of development, as Piaget first and then Keegan showed us. And in cognitive terms, which is a different strand of development, you go through phases of first learning logic and then transcending it in the direction of dialectical thinking, which is a kind of holistic, systemic thinking. It's an integral thinking. And so these two developmental strands do indeed determine a person's frame of reference. So, for instance, if somebody says, "I can't get along with my with my boss," developmentally, we will try to understand what that means for the person. Is the person an other dependent person who defines himself or herself on the basis of other people's expectations? That would be one meaning the sentence has. If the person is a self-authoring person at a higher social emotional level, that would be another meaning. So what would it mean at level 3? Well, it would mean that the person does not really understand that what they call the boss is an internal voice in them and not just a physical other outside of them. And so what they are really essentially talking about is their own meaning making. So maybe the speaker considers himself to be victimized by his boss, not understood, not given the right kinds of work. It could be all these things which we could find out in an interview. If the person is at level 4, that could mean that he or she considers the boss as not being at the same level than they are. They might be less developed, so they might see themselves as more highly developed. And so, as you can see, that would have an entirely different meaning. That's what I mean by frame of reference, that in the first case, the frame of reference of the speaker is very, very different from the second case. So what happens if we don't understand that? Well, we won't understand that if we only focus on the content of the sentence, of what is said. We actually need to investigate how somebody says what he or she says. And by how, I mean from what social emotional level, but I also mean something else. I mean cognitively, what is the conceptual structure, the thought form structure of the person's speaking? What is the conceptual structure of what the person is saying? Now, this is a little more difficult to understand, but the notion is really, again, quite simple, namely that in our speech, whatever language, there is a structure in our thinking that we can determine. So, for instance, in the dialectical thought form framework, in a 1-hour interview, I can tell you what your present phase of cognitive development is. And I would do that in terms of what is called the 4 moments of dialectic. process, context, relationship, and transformation. And I would be able to say to you things like, your logical thinking is superb. You think mainly in static configurations, which I call context, but you are not at this point in your development able to really see the process aspect of what you are talking about, by which I mean the changes that constantly emerge and how they are embedded in other changes. Or I might say, well, your process thinking is beginning to be quite good, but you have no idea of relationships. You talk about relationships, but you don't really understand them, because what I mean by relationship is something very different than is meant in logical thinking. Dialectical relationships have to do with intrinsic connectedness. The fact that I am intrinsically connected to others like you. I couldn't be the human being that I am if I were not intrinsically connected. And so I am embedded in a larger common ground that you and I and others share. And we are different, but this difference also points to a sameness, because we are different as human beings. That is the common ground. We are human beings, you and I. And so we need to think identity or sameness at the same time that we think difference. That's a very important principle of dialectical thinking. And then I would probably say to that person, your logical thinking is well developed. You have begun to think in terms of emerging change. Your relationship perception, your perception of what is intrinsically related, although outwardly different, is very poor. And therefore, you probably will have a hard time understanding transformation. And transformation is not change. That is more like process. But transformation is taking context, process, and relationship together and thinking them together. For instance, we say of a company that it is fragile. The more complex it is, the more fragile it is, meaning it has limited harmony, limited durability, limited sustainability. Now, what does that imply? Well, it implies, as you will agree, I think, that first of all, there is a context called the company. It's a system, an organization in which people work. Then we are also implying that there are processes which change the system unceasingly, because otherwise, why would the system be fragile? So we are including process. So we have connected context and process aspects of the company we are talking about. But we are also including relationships, meaning how things inside the company and outside the company are related. And that is another frame of reference of which I spoke, that we need to understand both the social emotional and the cognitive frame of reference of a person or team in order to know what is going on. And that is what CDF is very good at, even without the psychological component that it also includes, which is behavioral, and says you are aggressive and you are this or that, or you tend to do this and you have this or this habit. It doesn't really matter, because your habits are the way you manifest your habits are determined by your frame of reference. And so if you come here to IDM to study CDF, that's what you would learn. You would learn a different kinds of thinking about people, about reality. You would learn to listen to people in terms of their frame of reference. And that is not taught much. And you can't learn it from books either. So thank you for listening to me. And have a good day.